Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Katie Rowley. I'm with the NOAA Central Library, and we are very excited to be hosting today's presentation on how to improve a writer's skills in the workplace. Our speaker today is Frank McEvoy, who is with the National Weather Service. And he is going to be kind of giving a quick, concise direction on improving one's business writing using active versus passive voice, avoiding redundancy, eliminating contemporary cliches, and correct word choice. Frank has worked as a technical writer and editor for over 40 years. He earned a BA from Bowdoin College and a master's in education from George Mason University. And he's also an award-winning screenwriter, and he has been working with the National Weather Service since 2017. We will be accepting questions during this presentation, but we will be holding them until the end. But if you do have a question during the course of the presentation, please place that in the question/chat panel, and we will hold on to them until the end. The presentation is available to be shared, and I will be sending that to everyone who registered for this event after the event is over. We are recording this, and it will be placed on the library's YouTube channel. If there are any technical issues during the presentation, my recommendation is that you log on and log off and log back on. That solves most issues. If you're still having trouble, you can email library.brownbag@noaa.gov, and we will help you troubleshoot. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Frank.
Good afternoon, everyone. And just as a little history, this is a business English workshop I gave at FEMA about 5 years ago. And I came across it, and I thought the Weather Service might enjoy it as well. So let's start out. These are some handy references. There's William Strong's Elements of Style. This is a public domain book that's online. E.B. White, who was for a long time a writer for the New Yorker, he revisited Professor Strong's Elements of Style and reworked it and modernized it for the general trade. And it was a very, very, very popular book. You have the GPO style manual, which we're supposed to write to, but like the Platonic ideal, no one ever lives up to it because the GPO style manual has some quirks that most people, I think, look funny. And Grammar Girl is just one site I came across that I thought was useful as well. Here we have some parts of speech. We have noun, that's a person, place, or thing. Verb is an action word. Pronoun is shorthand, he, I, you. Adjective is something that modifies a noun. Adverb, a word that modifies a verb. Preposition is a construction, a word that is usually used with a direct object, like to the fore, beyond the pale. Conjunction is a linking word, like and, but, you, and, but, or. And an interjection is something like alas or hurrah or something like that. One little trivia point is if you have a preposition without an object, it's really an adverb. Possessives. You form the possessive singular of nouns with an apostrophe S. Particularly the first example, Charles's friend, not Charles with an apostrophe. And more on possessives, that some words, particularly antique ones like Jesus or Achilles, are commonly have just with an S apostrophe without an apostrophe S. But one of the things that Professor Strong recommended is that you rewrite that to the law of Moses or the temple of Isis or the heel of Achilles. And pronoun possessive like hers, its, theirs don't have an apostrophe. Restrictive versus non-restrictive clauses are, it's also termed essential or unessential. And the author really has to be clear with this. People who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. That is restrictive. Non-restrictive, Eddie won the prize, which I won last year. Basically, you can leave out which I won last year and the sentence makes sense. Which is always non-restrictive, and that is always restrictive. And the example I give there, I was shocked that he got the raise which I expected, and which is set off with commas in that example. Be conscious of case. This was a surprise to he and I. Nope. This was a surprise to him and me. You hear that error a lot these days. For some reason, people seem to be afraid of saying me, and I'm still wondering why that is. Also, be conscious of number. No one expected they would forget where the car was parked. Wrong. No one expected he or she would forget where the car was parked. And that's correct. This is changing right now, but I'm more conservative with grammar than a lot of people are. I still think that using they when you're talking about one person is not the greatest. Inanimate or animate, he was the man that brought the cat carrier. Wrong. He was the man who brought the cat carrier, and that's correct. Compared to and compared with. This is a nuance that a lot of people are not aware of, so I threw it in here. Compared to is checking for similarities. Compared with is checking for similarities and differences. And to have a real world example, I say he compared Frank to a great author, when the correct form is he compared Frank with a great author. Affect versus effect. Affect with an A is usually seen as a verb meaning to influence. Affect is a noun means appearance, as in the convict had a flat affect. Effect with an E is usually a noun. To be confusing, its one appearance as a verb means to bring about. He effected a positive change in the addict. It's versus its, that's IT apostrophe S versus ITS. It's with an apostrophe is a contraction for it is. It's without the apostrophe is the possessive of it. It's a problem for its program is the example I give. It sounds singular, but it's plural, or vice versa. Criteria, as in there is one criterion to the assumption, is wrong. The singular is criterion. I think I made a mistake there. Criteria, as in there is one criteria to the assumption, is wrong. There's a singular form, it's criterion. Media is the plural form of medium. He felt the media was biased, wrong. He felt the medium were biased, correct. And this is a thing, this is a construction that's sort of like, it's sort of evolving. That usually when people have media with a singular verb, people really don't notice it. So it's maybe becoming more accepted. The Department of Redundancy department, right here. On a daily basis, nope, you can just say daily. If you see something like testing capabilities, nope, testing's fine. And past history, you don't need the past because, well, history usually happens in the past. Enumerated lists. I went to the store to buy some supplies. I made the following list: A, milk, B, bread, C, cheese. That's without any punctuation because it's a short list. If the list had longer elements, you might want to throw in a period, but here there isn't one. And here's another example. I went to the store to buy some supplies. I bought A, milk, B, bread, C, cheese. And those require periods because each element completes the sentence. One item lists. These should be avoided. Don't write Frank is very annoying for the following reasons. Dot, his jokes aren't funny. And rewrite as Frank is annoying because of his unfunny jokes. Horizontal lines. This is something that is easily confused, and I've been confused on it at 1.2. There are three horizontal lines in play. The first is an M dash, which should be written with no bookending spaces, but that depends on the style guide you're working with. Let me see here. This construction is not as formal as parentheses. And the example I give is Dracula invited Jonathan Harker for dinner, actually to dinner at his castle. The second horizontal line is an N dash, is in November. This is only used for ranges, K through 12, March 1 through 15. And then the third is a hyphen. And this is often used in a construction of unit modifiers. This constituted our year-end analysis. But if you rewrote it, this constituted our analysis at the year end, there wouldn't be a hyphen. Just to be annoying, the construction, a highly priced asset, is incorrect. The correct form is a highly priced asset without the hyphen. Word placement, this can affect with an A, not effect with an E, the sentence's meaning. I only punched the head of the NWS in the nose. I only punched the head of the NWS in the nose. I punched only the head of the NWS in the nose. I punched the head of only the NWS in the nose. I punched the head of the NWS only in the nose, and I punched the head of the NWS in the nose only. And if that were a real world example, I would be working someplace else. Participial phrases. In a given sentence, the participial phrase should refer to the subject. Confusion can lead to unintentional humor. And the wrong example, the cowboy rode into town on a horse with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth. That's wrong. The cowboy with a cigarette dangling out of his mouth rode into town on a horse. IZE words. Some enjoy writing verbs that ending in IZE when better, less inflated words are available. Instead of prioritize, maybe use rank. Instead of utilize, maybe use used. Be conscious of your audience. Some might love prioritize, and that's really true. That I think as an editor, I have to be conscious of what my client wants. You know, someone might look at me using rank in the sentence and say, nah, use prioritize. And I go, okay. The Oxford comma. In a series, separate each element with the ending comma, as in red, comma, white, comma, and blue, honest, comma, energetic, and headstrong, comma, but headstrong. He opened the letter, comma, read it, comma, and made a note of its contents. A lot of people lean away from the Oxford comma, but there's a nuance that a lot of people don't get. And that's why I put in this real world example, as a matter of fact. In college, Frank roomed with Pete, comma, Joe, comma, Bob, and Mary, and there's no comma after Bob. And there's a reason for that, and the reason for that was that Bob and Mary were married. And it's appropriate to leave the comma out there because they were a set. Number style. Spell out the numbers 0 through 9, set the numbers 10 and above in figures. There were figure 8 places a table wrong. There were 8 spelled out places a table correct. Note this construction. The plants had 5 figure, 8 figure, and 10 reactors respectively. That's because you conform to the higher number, or in this case, the highest number. If 10 were 9, you would spell them all out. And according to the GPO style manual, set time in figures. The reactions took 2 seconds, and that's a figure. And also, I mentioned the construction. There are 8 with the figure 8 pieces in parentheses. That's redundant. You can just spell out 8. And this is a big deal, passive versus active voice. Active voice, where the subject is the doer of the action rather than the object, is by nature more concise and more vigorous. And the active example I give, Eddie gave the award to Mark, and the passive one is Mark was given the award by Eddie. And passive voice is handy, though, if the doer is unknown or politics comes into play. And the example I give is the man was mugged in the alley. I mean, you don't know who did it, but the poor man was mugged. And the second example is the budget cut was decided. And a lot of people would not want to be the one making that decision. Verbally speaking, readers often use the word verbally in documents. Verbally means something communicated orally or in writing. Mary gave a verbal confirmation. Did she write a note? Did she say yes? As that sentence stands, it's ambiguous. Errors may occur.
Frank, this is Katie. I'm going to break in real quick. Can you, we've had a request if you could slow down a little bit in your presentation.
I can do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I apologize for that. I tend to rush. This is errors may occur with the S finding ending error in parentheses. Avoid this construction. Often it can be omitted. It often leads to an error. In the example, I have the pilots with the S in parentheses fly airplanes. The sentence should read flies or fly, since the author is trying to skirt away from the compound predicate. Easily confused homonyms. We have TO, TOO, and TWO. TO is a preposition or an adverb. TOO means also. It is usually set off with commas. And the example I gave is the reactor overheated 2. And TWO is the number. Another set is there, THERE, THEIR, and THEY apostrophe RE. THERE can be in many parts of speech, but it usually appears as an adverb or pronoun. Set it there. There is where my heart is. THEIR is the possessive for they, and THEY apostrophe RE is the contraction for they are. And I see that confused many, many times. Be clear on tenses. We have present, as in they go, past. All evaluations are in the past tense, they went. Future, they will go. Present perfect, they have gone. Past perfect, they had gone. Future perfect, they will have gone. In your writing, be conscious of when events occurred. This happened on June 1st, 2022. Well, it didn't happen. It hasn't happened yet. Bring or take. Whether you use bring or take generally depends on your point of reference for the action. You ask people to bring things to the place you are, and you take things to the place you are going. You bring things here and you take things there. Fewer versus less. The basic rule is that you use less with mass nouns and fewer with count nouns. 10 items or less, wrong. 10 items or fewer is correct. Predicate number. In rare cases, the object of the preposition determines the number of the verb. Most of the wall is in ruins. Most of the bricks are on the ground. And in that situation, you don't know really what the number of most is, and it's the prepositional phrase that gives the clue. And the majority of the voters are against the bankster, and the majority of the population is ill. And that is the end of my presentation.
Wow, thank you, Frank. That was a little fast, I think, for everyone involved. But wonderful, and we have a ton of questions. So we're gonna just dive right in, and hopefully this will clear up some things for everyone. First up, what's your opinion on whether it should be nymphs apostrophe or nymphs apostrophe S?
Apostrophe S.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's really Professor Strunk would say that, you throw in apostrophe S everywhere, and except in those few rare occasions.
Understood. Could you go over restrictiveness of which and that again? And can you give several examples?
Going back. Okay, and thank you for the question, because this is important. It's basically, I've seen it. It depends. You can use any term you want, but restrictive versus non-restrictive, or essential or unessential or non-essential. It's basically it's a clause in the sentence. It's restrictive if you need the clause to be there for the sentence to make sense. In the first example, I said people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. If you delete who live in glass houses, you are left with people shouldn't throw stones. Okay. I mean, but even if I'm the beach and there are a lot of stones and I want to throw them in the water, and but you have to have who live in glass houses in there to give the meaning of the sentence. Whereas the second example, Eddie won the prize, which I won last year. If I delete which I won last year, Eddie won the prize. That still makes sense. And I said also that which is always non-restrictive and that is restrictive. If you have a clause with that in it with a set off with a comma or set off with commas, if it's in the middle of the sentence, it shouldn't be.
Got it, thank you. The next question, is the use of apostrophes only appropriate with people or can it be used with objects as well? For example, the window's color was fading.
Yes, it's with nouns. It doesn't have to be with people, it's with nouns.
Great. Next one, what about the term social media? Is that singular or plural?
That, again, this is one of the things where it's evolving. It should be, if you want to be really, really strict, social media are impacting the world. But most people I hear use a singular in there. And that's essentially, I remember when I was in school, data is the plural of datum. And by rights, it should have a plural verb. But if I said the data are coming in, a lot of people would look at me sort of strangely for that. So it's a type of thing where, it goes, I guess it's a difference between what's correct and what's common usage.
Okay, fine lines. Okay, next question. Should contractions be avoided?
In formal writing, they generally are avoided. But again, I would tend to do that. I would tend not to. If I were working on a mod note or a manual or something like that, I would tend to lean away from them. But obviously in my own letters and my own writing, a screenplay or something like that, I'd have a lot of contractions.
Great. Speaking about evolving, what drives your conservative approach to changing language with the singular they, especially since it was the named Webster's 2019 Word of the Year?
Yes, I realize that. I'm really it. I guess the term is offends my sensibilities, and you can say yes, people talk that way or people write that way, but that doesn't mean they're writing or speaking correctly. So I tend to go to be more conservative in my own writing. And again, if I were to get a document that had that use of they in there, I'd probably change it. See how it flies. If the customer wants it they, then it would be they. But in a lot of situations where in my daily work, I've made things correct, like let's say conform to the GPO style manual. Let's say making 2 hours to a figure, and my boss looked at that and he said that looks funny. Well, I changed it to GWO because that was legitimate feedback.
Following up on that. Sorry, Frank. I was gonna follow up with a very similar question.
Okay.
If you're using he or she versus they or something, what do you suggest using when referring to someone who has not stated their sexual identity?
I'd say he or she.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. You were talking about pilots in one of your slides. How should the pilots with an S in parentheses sentence actually be written?
Repeat that, please.
Sorry, there was a slide about, you were talking about pilots.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay, so the question was, how should the pilot's sentence actually be written?
I would say, when I would do, I would, on that example I give, the pilots with the S in parentheses fly airplanes, I would get rid of the parentheses and I'd just say the pilots fly airplanes.
Okay, so remove the parentheses, but keep the S, and it would be perfectly fine.
Yep.
Awesome.
And because it doesn't really matter to me anyway that whether or not it's one or two pilots. Both of them they're all flying them.
Great, thank you. Can you clarify when it's appropriate to use compound adjectives?
Oh, yes. Let me get back. Let me see where it'll take me a bit to find this. Oh, wait a second, here it is. Yes, the basic thing for a unit modifier, two adjectives joined with a conjunction. The basic rule I was taught was if you can stick an and between them, and the sentence still makes sense, you can leave the hyphen out. In my example, this constituted our year-end analysis. If I say this constituted our year-end analysis, that doesn't make sense, because what's an end analysis? And you put the hyphen together, it combines them into one meaning, a different meaning than the two words alone.
Okay, thank you. Someone said, sorry if I missed this, can you speak on capitalization? For example, when writing about a plant species common name.
Repeat that, please.
Yes. Can you speak on capitalization? For example, when writing about a plant species common name.
Oh, if you had a specific name, like I'm just winging this. If you had like a Dorchester orchid, you would have both of those. Dorchester and orchid would be initial capped. But later on, if you talked about orchids or that orchid, even without the Dorchester, you could have it lowercase.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What is your opinion on grammar correcting software?
I think I don't use like Grammarly or things like that. In my feeling on anything, especially like a spell checker or things like that, is it's a useful tool. But again, I have, especially with something like Grammarly or things, I haven't used that enough to figure out whether I know the grammar better than it does. Again, if it's giving suggestions, you can take the suggestions, but you don't have to take them.
Okay. Next question. I think I heard that testing capabilities is redundant. If I heard correctly, why do you feel that term is redundant?
Because when they have capabilities like evaluation capabilities or inspection capabilities, I just think capabilities is not adding anything to it. If I have like evaluation capabilities, what's wrong with just evaluations or evaluation? I just think it's a word that tends to be inflating rather than meaningful.
Okay, thank you. Next one. Is it University of California or the University of California? Similarly, is it the nymphs or nymphs?
I would have a tendency to think I think it would depend on the sentence. I mean, if I were writing something like, if I were to say something like this, I know people who attended the University of California at Berkeley. I'd put a "the" in there, and it would be like for nymphs or something like that. It would depend on the meaning of the sentence. If I said that the nymphs rise to the surface at dusk, you could also put in a sentence that would be correct, like nymphs were common in this body of water.
Gotcha. Okay. We've got some more questions kind of about apostrophes and plural forms. So what's your recommendation of indicating the plural form of an acronym that ends in the letter S? Should you add an extra S?
Lowercase s.
Okay. Good to know. Okay, so I'm not sure how much this is grammatically or style choice, but would you put one space after the period or two spaces?
Well, when I took typing back in the dark ages, we were told to put two after the period. But the general rule now, I think, is just to save paper, is to have one space after the period.
Thank you.
Especially when you consider the amount of paper the government pumps out, maybe a space is a lot of trees.
Good to hear. We have a few questions about you going over proper hyphen usage again. Can you walk through that again?
Okay, we'll go over the whole thing. The horizontal lines. And this is important. And the only and to be fully honest, the reason I know this is because like 10 years ago, I was working at a job and my boss came in and said, "You're confused about this stuff." And he gave me a little micro lesson in what the things are. It's that if you have an M dash, which is a longish dash, if you go on Microsoft Word and look in symbols, there's a way in there you can find you can find an M dash. That's M as in Mike dash. And sometimes people, I've seen it, people put two hyphens, and sometimes the Microsoft Word will correct that to an M dash, but there's actually a symbol there. It's basically a way of setting off words. Again, as what I got out of Strunk and White, it's a way of setting off words. It's not as formal as a set of parentheses. And the example I said was Dracula invited Jonathan Harker for dinner, and then hyphen actually for to be dinner, and then another dash at his castle. The N dashes, that's November dash, is shorter dash, which is longer than a hyphen but shorter than the M dash. This is the one and only use. Well, actually, there's another use, but this one and only use is really for ranges, like K through 12 or June 1st through 10th. One thing too is I realized a while ago, and I've used it, is that if you have a minus sign in a document, it should be an N dash there too. And then the hyphen is used for, again, for hyphenation. The word doesn't hyphenate the way we used to do on typewriters, but basically it's for unit modifiers, and to for words that are combined. Let me see if I can see. I said year-end analysis, but well-formed sentence. Well-formed can be hyphenated.
Awesome. Thank you for going over that.
No problem. This is great.
We do have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to keep scrolling through them and finding some common ones. On page 23, on slide 23, if you could go there. Why is there no comma before Bob and Mary?
there's no, in that example, which actually I did, those are the names of my senior roommates, as a matter of fact. The reason I left a comma out after Bob is because there was a relationship between Bob and Mary. In fact, it was the legal one. They were married. If they hadn't been married and we were all living like in a 5-bedroom apartment, the correct thing would be to have a comma after Bob. And in that situation, you wouldn't have like Joe, comma, and Bob and Mary. That's not the way this type of construction is written.
Good to know. When would you use whom versus who?
Whom is again, that would be whom is objective, and it would be like with an object of a preposition. If I came up to you and said, to whom should I give this document? I wouldn't say to who should I give this document. It's the whom is the object of the preposition. It's, you know, the question would be, to whom do you want me to give this document? You want me to give this document to whom? And that's the reason.
Understood. We have another request if you could go over slide 26 and give another couple examples.
Oh, verbal. The thing is, I was just my basic stand on this is that if I tell you, you and I had a verbal agreement, well, that doesn't really, you know, it's sort of like, well, what type of an agreement was it? Did you say something to me? Did we shake hands on it? Or did we write a contract? Because both of those are verbal. Speaking is a verbal expression, and writing things down that's a verbal expression as well. That's my main point on that, because I see that, you know, and hear that a lot. People say, well, we had a verbal agreement. Well, was it writing? Was it just something you said? You know, I'm just basically saying that it's ambiguous, and a lot of people would say, I think most people would probably say that a verbal agreement means you said something. Well, it doesn't have to be. You could send a letter.
Good to know. Our next question. I've lately seen further being used in place of farther. Should farther always be used when referring to distance?
Yes.
Short and sweet. Awesome. Why is parallel structure important for lists?
Parallel construction is important for lists because if we go back, let me see if I can go back to my lists here. Because in this situation, this is sort of a quick and dirty example. But if instead of milk, bread, and cheese, you had longer elements in the list, and if you had like A and B started with nouns and C started with a verb, that's essentially you would have, if you instead of a list, you had laid them out as 3 complete sentences, the last sentence would be an error. It would say, I bought finding what was on the bottom shelf, you know, or something like that. You know, it would just be an error. It's just a, and again, you can set up a parallel enumerated list a number of different ways. In my example there, I bought milk, cheese, and bread. I could have put I colon and then A bought milk, B bought bread, C bought cheese. It would be a little awkward, but it would be correct.
Following on that about lists, is it just personal preference if you use ABC versus 1, 2, 3?
Yes.
Or
yes.
Okay, so
yeah.
Personal preference.
That would be on your formatting, you know, whatever, you know, and the style sheet you're working toward might dictate whether it should be 1, 2, 3 ABC or something, and that I just pulled that out as a way of doing it. That's it can be, you know, I, double I, triple I, or it doesn't matter.
Good to know. Next question. What about the word timekeeper? Is it time-keeper or timekeeper as one or time space keeper?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but I can find out. I mean, what I would do on that, I'm not going to do it because I want to keep my presentation up. What I would do is I would go on the Google and put in timekeeper and see what examples came back.
Good to know.
And that, thank you for the question, because there is sort of an evolution as far as compound words that I've noticed, is that you might have two words that eventually will be hyphenated and eventually will be made one word. I can think like this is not the greatest example, but email. The style guides that I write to at work have email with a hyphen, but not that many people use email with a hyphen anymore.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain the difference between EG and IE?
Yeah, E period G period comma and I period E period comma. EG means for example, and IE means that is. And I don't know the Latin expressions off the top of my head, but that's what they mean.
Thank you. So if you have a 45-day public comment period, would you put a hyphen between 45 and day?
Yes.
Good to know. Solving lots of people's problems today, I think. Okay. Can you elaborate the distinction when offsetting parenthetical information with dashes or parentheses?
Not really, because again, I was just using that example I got from Professor Strong, and it was just to be a matter of taste, I guess. I usually in my own writing, I tend not to use em dashes for setting things off. Usually, I use parentheses. But you know, that would just be, you know, I think actually that is a nuance that most people wouldn't catch anyway. So it really doesn't matter what you use. But again, Professor Strong just basically said that it's not as formal as parentheses.
Okay, we do have a few more questions about putting the in front of things. So especially with agencies. So if we said the EPA determined, or would you say EPA determined? For agencies, especially government agencies that have acronyms, would you put the in front of them?
Well, the thing is, what I would do on that is, like if I were to say the EPA dictates XYZ, I would have the, but I remember when I was working at FEMA, I would not say the FEMA. I would say FEMA does this. You know, you know, that's just, you know, a lot of it, I think one of the things, a lot of it would be convention, what people generally do at your agency. Plus, if it looks funny, and you know, you can always, you know, you can be the arbiter of that, but also you can always ask a colleague, like, look at this, does this look funny?
Okay. Should spaces be used with any of the dash types?
It depends on the whatever style guide you have, because in some of the work that I do at the Weather Service, an em dash would have spaces on either side of it. In my own writing, I would not. But it's again, it depends on what style people have dictated.
Okay, great.
I had one job back 10 years ago where I had to shift through different customer preferences, maybe 5 or 6 times a day. I had to be very much, in fact, what I did was I scanned their preference sheet and put it on my computer so I could look at it. to know whether they wanted the Oxford comma, whether they wanted email with a hyphen, all these different things that they had, the customer had, the customer's own preferences, and it wanted it that way.
Understood. Okay, can you please revisit the effect versus affect section?
And right? Okay, I love English. English doesn't, they don't, it would be nice if English told us it's always this way and there's no other variant, but we don't have that with affect versus effect. Affect with an A is a verb, meaning to influence. The demonstration affected the vote in the next election. My girlfriend calling her by someone else's name affected our relationship. And the one time affect with an A appears as a noun, it means appearance. And when I was in counseling school, I came across that. They would talk about people's affects, how they looked. If someone were in front of me and had a very monotone accent and did no expression and said, "I'm really angry at you right now," I would say, well, his affect doesn't say that. His affect doesn't look like he's angry. Effect with an E is a noun. It's, this is, that dropping the brick on my toe had the effect of sending me to the emergency room. The one-time effect with an E is used as a verb. It means to bring about, particularly like in affecting change, bring about change. This, affected my attitude. I don't understand. I mean, whoever started grammar must have had a sense of humor for throwing a little ringer in like this.
Next question. Using quotation, does a comma go inside the quote or outside?
In quotations, the period or the comma goes inside the last quotation mark. And there's a reason for that. And I will tell you what the reason is. In the days of cold type, it was easier to move a row of type if the comma or period were inside the quotation mark. In Britain, it's the other way around, but in the United States, the comma and the period goes inside the quotation mark. And that's from the days of cold type. I'll give you another example of how the days of cold type still haunt us. The term uppercase for big letters and lowercase for small letters comes from when they set type by hand. The big letters were in the uppercase and the little letters were in the lowercase.
Good to know. Okay, let me look for our next question. We do have several still to go through, and I will keep this up until we hit our 1 o'clock hour. What's a good way to remember how to properly use to and for?
I don't understand the question. Like to as in TWO or TO and for FOUR as in FOR?
It's to TO and for FOR.
It's just what you're trying to, if you're, again, it depends on what you're trying to say in the sentence. If, if I'm going to go to the office, or if I'm going to, to the office for a project, that's the reason why I'm going.
Gotcha. What tools would you suggest when editing a written product to make sure that we are in compliance with the Plain Language Act?
Well, any directives that are current. We had this site had a plain language lecture, and the lecture was great, and different things in there would be applied to. Again, it's a type of thing where we're all working. I mean, I don't think anyone is going to write anything perfectly in his or her lifetime, but it's a goal we're all aiming for. And anything like, especially that plain language seminar, gives good guidance as to how to try to get there. It takes practice.
Okay, what about toward versus towards? Is one American and the other British English? Does it matter?
I would say probably it doesn't matter. Depends on how it sounds in the sentence.
Okay. There's a question on that and the. I often find unnecessary use of that and the, and wording reads better if left out. In the case of that, the, almost always that can be left out. Am I correct? That was
probably. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You mean like something like due to the fact that? Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That can be. Yeah. That can usually be cut. I usually cut that.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on using the word vary?
VARY.
Yes. VE, sorry, VE, as in that was a very good presentation.
Generally, the stuff that I've read said that you can cut vary pretty much anywhere you want. Sometimes I do. I think Mark Twain said that what you should do is substitute the word bang for very, and you'll see you can get rid of it. Usually you can get rid of it.
Mm-hmm. Could you please explain when it is advisable to establish and use acronyms? Is use of a common acronym always necessary?
Pardon me?
Sorry, let me repeat that. Can you please explain when it is advisable to establish and use acronyms? Is use of a common acronym always necessary?
I would say, well, a couple of things. One is acronyms are obviously useful because they're good abbreviations for concepts that are at hand and that people are using. But I would, as a general rule, define the acronym the first time that they appear in the document, just because a lot of times I see documents where acronyms aren't defined and I don't know what they mean. I can't assume that everyone knows what this acronym means.
Understood. Okay. Let me find another question. I see that G is capitalized every time the federal government is referenced. This makes sense when government is a noun, but when government is used as an adjective, shouldn't it be lowercase?
It depends on whether it depends on what government they mean. If it means the federal government, it might be uppercase. If not, it could be lowercase. What I would do if I were presented with that in my daily work, I'd check with the GPO style manual to see what they say, or it says.
Great. Okay, let me find another question. There are lots to choose from. Okay. Let me see. You guys all had great questions. That's what I will say.
Sure.
What if you have a bulleted list with a mix of sentences and single words? Do you have to use a period at the end of them for all?
Yes. If you have elements in the list that are long-ish, I'd say more than 4, 5, 6 words, you have to have a period, and you would have the single word elements would have a period as well.
Okay. Can you speak more on using a semicolon in a sentence?
What a semicolon usually is, you can join 2 independent clauses with a semicolon. And sometimes you can have like maybe semicolon, however, comma, and things like that. But the thing is that usually a semicolon implies that there's some sort of relationship with the 2 independent clauses. But in all situations with a semicolon, the sentences can be rewritten as 2 separate sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And it would still be correct.
Okay. Okay, we've got about 4 minutes left. I'm going to try and grab a few more questions. Okay. Can you give examples of other inflating words and phrases like in order to versus to?
Let me think. In order to, well, due to the fact that that works. In order to, I can't think of any off the top of my head more than those, but they're around. You know that, and one of the things that Professor Strunk and later E.B. White both emphasized was omitting needless words. That you can go through and cut words that are not really necessary, and anything like that is that if I put aside anything I'm working on for a couple of days and go back to it, I can see the words that are cuttable.
Okay. And I'm going to grab the next question. Some scientific questions use past tense, and some use present tense when they describe the results. Could you let us know your suggestion on that?
I would say that one of the things is depends on. I'm trying to think a parallel would be if I were writing a literary criticism, I could say something like Hamlet kills Polonius in his mother's bedroom. That would be present tense, though time is not really applicable there because it's a drama and it was written in the past. But I think it would depend on a lot of ways on how it sounds. If they say like Einstein, you could say Einstein discovered his theory of relativity in the early 1900s. You could say present tense in some situations. Past tense is obviously it wasn't the past, but depends on how you're phrasing it in the if you were writing something and you on a map, you could put like Einstein discovers the theory of relativity in 1901. Even if it was the past, it depends on what sense you're trying to get across. Also depends on if which sounds better.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Frank. We have the last minute here, so I'm just going to remind everyone that these slides will be available. I'm going to be sending them to everyone who registered for this, and please feel free to send them on to your colleagues. We have recorded this. It will be on the library's YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and type in NOAA Central Library, or you can go to the library's brown bag page, which you can find on the library's homepage, and find our YouTube links through that. I did not get to nearly half of the questions that were asked. So Frank, would you mind if people reached out to you individually via email?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was going to suggest the same thing. I mean, it's always kosher to ask.
Wonderful. And your email would be francis.mcavoy@noaa.gov, correct?
That's it.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you all for your wonderful questions. I will pass these on, but please reach out to Frank individually. And thank you for attending today. I hope you all have a wonderful and safe afternoon.
That was fun.